What happens when a man stands in the middle of a glamorous party and hears his own wife mock him in front of hundreds? And what if the man everyone thought was weak had been hiding a secret powerful enough to change everything? In the heart of Chicago, glowing with 1,000 lights, Ethan Carter stood on the rooftop of the Falcon Hotel. The cold air brushed his cheek, the music filled every corner, and the people around him wore their smiles the way they wore their expensive suits. Ethan was a quiet man, with deep eyes that resembled a winter lake, and a face that revealed an intelligence he never announced to anyone. He wore his only black suit and tried to look like he belonged to a world that had never truly been his. On the other side of the rooftop, Claire Carter was shining as if the night had been created for her alone. Her red dress stole every gaze, her smile opened every closed door, and her eyes spoke the language of power and ambition. She was talking to Richard Coleman, her boss at work, a man who owned everything except decency. Claire was standing closer to him than any wife wearing a wedding ring on her left hand ever should. Ethan approached her slowly and placed his hand on her shoulder gently, the way he always had. Claire turned to him, and in her eyes there was something that looked like irritation, as if he had interrupted a moment he was too simple to understand. Then she smiled, a smile that held more pity than warmth, and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Ethan is talented at exactly one thing, and that is disappearing into a crowd. Claire burst into laughter, and Richard laughed with her, and the sound spread through the air like a cold wave. The faces around them turned toward Ethan's eyes, asking what this silent man would do now. Some faces held curiosity, some held sympathy, and some were simply searching for an entertaining scene to retell tomorrow. But Ethan's face did not change. It did not flush with shame, and it did not pale with rage. Only his eyes spoke something deep that no one in that room was able to understand in that moment. He looked at Claire with a long, steady gaze, as if he were saying goodbye to something he had loved for years. Then he smiled a quiet smile that confused Claire more than any word he could have possibly said. The silence that frightened everyone. What happens when the man you humiliated simply does not come back? And what if his silence was not weakness, but the opening move of something no one saw coming? The morning after the party, Claire Carter woke up to an empty side of the bed. There was no note, no apology, and no sign of the man who had always been there when she opened her eyes. She stood in front of the mirror, and for the first time in years, a genuine question crossed her face. Where had Ethan gone? She had expected him to return the night before, defeated and quiet, the way he always returned after every small disagreement between them. She expected the doorbell to ring, and for him to arrive holding her favorite coffee and telling her he loved her, and putting the whole thing to rest. But the bell never rang, the phone never buzzed, and the apartment stayed as silent as a beautiful, empty tomb. On the other side of the city, Ethan was sitting inside a small place called Dawn Coffee Shop. In front of him was a hot cup and a notebook filled with ideas he had been writing for 3 quiet years. Those ideas were a complete business plan for a small technology company he had dreamed of building since the early days of their marriage. But he had always delayed, always waited, because Claire used to tell him his ideas were naive, and that the world had no need for them. That morning, Ethan opened his phone and sent a single message to his old friend Marcus White, a seasoned investor in the technology world. He wrote only one sentence: "I am ready. Now." Marcus replied within seconds, as if he had been waiting for exactly this message all along. He wrote back, "I will be in Chicago next week, and we will talk." At that same moment, Claire was sitting across from Richard Coleman in his office, trying to appear confident. But Richard was different today, cold, distracted, and no longer looking at her the way he had the night before. Claire understood with sudden clarity that the man who had laughed with her at her husband had never seen her as a partner. He had seen her as a beautiful amusement for one glamorous evening, and nothing more. She walked out of his office, carrying a heaviness in her chest she had never felt before. She called Ethan once, then twice, then 3 times. On the 4th attempt, he answered with a voice that was calm, carrying neither anger nor warmth. He told her with complete simplicity, "I am fine. Claire, please take care of yourself." Then he ended the call before she could say a single word. And in that moment, Claire felt something entirely foreign to her after years of marriage. She felt real fear, not of losing her status, but of having lost something that would never return to her. The man they never knew. What happens when a broken man stops trying to be fixed and starts building something new instead? And what if the version of him that everyone ignored turns out to be the most powerful one of all? 5 full days passed, and Ethan did not return to the apartment, did not send a long message, and did not ask for anything. He rented a small apartment in the Riverside neighborhood close to the Chicago River and began living with a quietness he had not known in years. The apartment was simple, but it held something the large, shared apartment had never been able to offer. It held genuine peace. On the first morning, Ethan carried his coffee and sat in front of the wide window, watching the river below. He felt that the air here was different, that breathing came easier, and that the voice inside him was slowly returning after a long absence. That voice was the one he had silenced for so many years, trying to appear patient and kind and endlessly accommodating. In the evening, he met Marcus at a quiet restaurant, and they sat for 2 full hours talking about the idea. When Ethan finished walking him through the entire project, Marcus stared at him with wide-open eyes and said, "Ethan, why did you wait this long? This idea is worth millions." Ethan felt something shift inside his chest, something unfamiliar to him. It was not pride, and it was not revenge, but something quieter and far deeper than either of those things. It was the feeling of finally being truly seen by another person. That same day, Claire was sitting in a beauty salon, trying to appear as though everything was fine. Her friend Diana was telling a joke, but Claire did not laugh from her heart. She kept thinking about Ethan's face that night on the rooftop, the moment he looked at her, then smiled and simply walked away. That smile had been following her into every room she entered. She called her mother and told her what had happened. Her mother responded with a firm and steady voice, saying, "Claire, deep inside you already know that you were wrong." Claire said nothing, closed the phone, and stared at her wedding ring for a very long time. At that very same moment, Olivia Bennett, a young event photographer, happened to sit down beside Ethan at Dawn Coffee Shop. A notebook slipped from her hands, and Ethan leaned down and picked it up for her. When she looked at him, she noticed something rare in his eyes that most people never carry. She saw a man holding real pain, but one who had refused to let that pain poison who he was. She said to him with a simple, honest smile, "Thank you." And he replied with one single, quiet word, "You are welcome." But that one word opened a conversation that stretched for a full hour. They talked about art and the city and the dreams that sleep for years before suddenly waking. And when Ethan finally stepped out of the coffee shop, his face carried something it had not carried in a very long time. It carried the beginning of a real smile. What happens when the woman who humiliated her husband discovers that the world she built on arrogance is quietly crumbling? And what if the moment she reaches out to take back what she lost is the exact moment she realizes it was already gone? 2 weeks after the party, the name Ethan Carter began appearing in places Claire never expected. Marcus White had posted on his business page about a promising new technology venture led by a brilliant, quiet mind from Chicago. He did not mention the name yet, but the words brilliant and quiet hit Claire like a cold glass of water thrown directly at her face. She read the post 3 times, sitting alone in the apartment that suddenly felt far too large for one person. She called her colleague James, who knew Marcus through mutual connections. James told her, with barely hidden amusement, that the founder was a man named Ethan Carter, and that investors were already circling the project with serious interest. Claire put the phone down and sat on the kitchen floor, still in her office clothes, staring at nothing. The man she had called invisible in front of 100 people was now being called brilliant by the people who actually mattered. Meanwhile, Ethan was in a glass conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown building. He stood in front of 4 serious investors in tailored suits and presented his idea with a clarity and confidence that surprised even himself. His voice was steady, his eyes were sharp, and not once did he hesitate or shrink the way he used to shrink in rooms where Claire was present. When he finished speaking, the room was silent for exactly 4 seconds before the lead investor leaned forward and said, "We want in."